Good afternoon, everyone. Dean Starck and I are contemporaries, but our entry into nursing was accomplished in different ways. My original degree in nursing was from a hospital-based diploma program, and Dean Starck's was from an associate degree program. So we thought that might be the place to start. Why that was, what was happening, that different kind of entry was available, and those kinds of problems or circumstances actually still exist today. So Dean Starck, if you want to talk about that, please.
Yes, I do, because I would like to focus today on the relationship between medicine and nursing and how that has changed over the years, sometimes adversarial, sometimes very collaborative, and to tell you some of the reasons for that and what I think we should do going forward. As Adrian said, early on, most of nursing education was what you would call training and not really education. So you were trained in hospitals. The students had no college credit, no college education. It was all done in the hospital. Most of those programs were 3 years, including summers. And let's face it, a lot of the students were used for very cheap labor to run the hospitals. Then in the 1950s at Columbia University, which was one of the only places that studied nursing education, there was a student who did her dissertation on what she called, we should establish an associate degree in nursing. And that is someone who had some college education, but who still had a lot of hospital-based clinical training. So happened that the president of the college, the junior college, where in the town where I live, which was in the deep South, America's Georgia, where Jimmy Carter and that group is from, that president happened to come across the person at Columbia who had done this research, Mildred Montag. And he invited her down to Georgia, and they decided to set up the very first program in the state that would be an associate degree in nursing instead of diploma. There were in existence a few baccalaureate in nursing programs in the state, but I think there were just 2 at that time. So the associate degree concept was that you would have both college courses and nursing clinical courses at the same time throughout your educational program. And you'd graduate with an associate degree, and then you could go on and add to that and get a baccalaureate. However, the state of Georgia says you have to have 36 months of clinical training to be a registered nurse. So our associate degree program was 36 months in length, which is, you can count up, is the same as a baccalaureate degree, 36 months. So at our program, we both took classes and worked in the hospital. And we really went to class in the daytime and then worked the 3 to 11 shift. And we rotated and did all the shifts and had plenty of clinical experience. Because we ran out of courses to take that are required for an associate degree, we took extra courses, and I decided to go ahead and take courses that would transfer into a baccalaureate program. So I went ahead and took organic chemistry and some things like that while I was there. I went on to Emory immediately after that and got my bachelor's degree. And in those days, you could teach in a nursing school with a baccalaureate degree. So I had 1 year of clinical experience after my baccalaureate degree. But actually, I had so much clinical during my associate degree that I felt pretty experienced. So I took a teaching job at Grady Hospital, which is kind of like the Ben Taub of Atlanta, Georgia. And I want to bring in some racial diversity issues as well, because this was 1960s, and it was the Deep South, and Grady Hospital had two schools of nursing. They had what is called a white school and a black school. And I was low on the totem pole of teachers. I think I was about 21 or 22. So I was assigned to teach in the black school. And it was really quite a challenge. We had two schools of nursing, the very same curriculum, and pretty much the same faculty, but we were in separate places. The Grady Hospital at that time was built in the shape of an H, and on one side were the white patients and the other side were the black patients. So that's kind of the environment that I came up in, and it was very strange in a lot of ways. We can maybe go into some of that later if you want to. But I saw right away, after teaching for a year with the baccalaureate degree, that I needed more education if I was going to remain in teaching. So I went back to Emory then and got my master's degree. And did some other teaching. And then later on, I went on and got my doctoral degree in nursing at UAB. But I want to tell you what was going on in nursing education around that time. So a well-educated faculty member would have like a master's degree, and there were not any programs where nurses could get doctoral degrees, except this one at Columbia University, which you got an EDD degree. So that was the only thing available for nurses who want to get more education. Those nurses were very steeped in how to write objectives, how to do lesson plans, all the educational methodology. So they kind of left clinical nursing and, if you will, moved into the ivory tower. And many of them lost their clinical skills. But I wanted to talk about this because I think it's very important. A group of nursing leaders then realized what was happening, and a federal program was set up called the Nurse Scientist Program. And this program would take bright students and send them for a PhD in physiology or biochemistry or some of the sciences. Sociology, the whole gamut of sciences. What happened then is a lot of those nurses left nursing and went to the other discipline.
As I mentioned, my education was in a diploma program, a hospital-based program. And I'm a few years younger, not many, but a few years younger than Dean Starck. And I entered nursing school in 1967. And when I did that, hospital-based schools were the majority of the programs for nursing. There were very few requirements. Actually, the only reason that one would attend a baccalaureate program as opposed to a hospital program was that if you thought you wanted to teach or if you wanted to go into public health, which for some reason at the time required a baccalaureate in nursing. But if one thought that one wanted to do patient-centered care, one entered a hospital-based program that was a 3-year program, September to September, and rotated through all of the disciplines. So when one graduated from that program, one was ready to enter the workforce and could work in a hospital with a pretty developed nursing skills. During this time period, there was much discussion about moving nursing education from these hospital-based programs into the university. And by the time I graduated in 1970 and started working in the early 70s, the movement to close diploma programs was really on its way and quite advanced. And over the next decade, the overwhelming majority of hospital-based diploma programs closed. And so nursing education started moving into the university. The associate degree program that Dean Starck entered was one of the ways that that could be done, or there were schools just operating baccalaureate programs, four-year baccalaureate programs. And by now, there may be a handful of diploma programs left in the country. I think there may be one or two still in Texas, but those schools are closed, most of them by the 1980s. And nursing then moved into the university. I think most of you probably have a medical background in this room. Okay, okay. And I think most of us are familiar with the format of nursing, of medical education. You do your 4 years of college, you do your med school, you do your residency. Nursing never developed that way. It was always a catch-up sort of program. Remember that although medical schools were filled with men and women struggling to get into medical schools, nursing schools were primarily women. And it was thought for a long period of time, for social reasons, that women really didn't require that much education. For one thing, there were social constraints about educating women. And nursing has always been in the position of trying to move itself forward, but it's done it in incremental steps. So that nursing has not developed, okay, 4 years of college, 4 years of nursing school, and off you go. Programs have developed over time. First it was the diploma program, then it was the associate degree program, then the baccalaureate program, then the master's programs were introduced, and then to teach at the university, one was required to have a master's degree. And then doctoral degrees were introduced, and now to teach, you are required to have a doctoral degree. But there is still a very small percentage of nurses who have doctoral degrees even at this point. I think it's still under 1%, isn't it, of nurses in the United States with doctoral degrees. So that in itself is a problem, because in order to teach, you have to have a doctoral degree. There's a shortage of nurses, but there's only so much faculty available in order to teach students. So the size of classes are limited because of the number of faculty that are available. And as the nursing schools have evolved, they have tried to meet the changing needs of healthcare, their students and their patients, by developing different programs. So when you enter nursing school, there are various clinical tracks, there are different programs of specialty in the master's program and the doctoral programs to try to meet the need. Nurse practitioners recently to try to provide greater access for entry into healthcare services for the population, but it has not been a smooth, this is the way we're going to do it and accomplish it. It has been a piecemeal, step by step, trying to get this done. Are you
Okay. Yeah, I want to pick back up on this story about what happened in nursing education. So we had some nurses that got their doctorate in other sciences, and then they pretty much left nursing. About the same time, we had the feminism movement going on. Most of you are much too young to remember that. But there was a great movement, as Adrienne said, that women need a good education, they need equal opportunity for different things. And there was this feeling in nursing education that we've always relied on physicians to teach us. And most of my education about the disease conditions of pathology was taught by physicians, and then the nurse would come in and say, this is the nursing care for this patient. So I grew up in my education very comfortable communicating with physicians and asking questions and being a part of the team. During this feminism time, it seemed to me that there was a great deal of anger in nursing, being mostly female, at the male gender period, but particularly at physicians. And this was the period where, up until this time, the nurses carried the charts for the physicians. So if a physician came up on the floor and wanted to make rounds on, say, his 6 patients, the nurse pulled all 6 of the charts, and they were big metal flapped things, and carried those things around. The nurse was expected to let the doctor enter the room first, and also if you were at the nurse's station working and a physician came up, you was expected to rise, to get up and get out of the way. Dr. Hamilton, did you have any of those experiences? No. Did the nurses stand when you came up? So the feminism movement kind of said, we don't need to be carrying the charts. Let them carry their own charts. And they should be opening the door for us. We don't need to open the door for them. So and we were then taught as students, you're not to get up just because a physician walks up to the desk. But if you're in the way, and physicians are in and out in hurries, so don't obstruct their work, but you don't have to rise and stand at attention. So some things like that began to change in nursing education. But during this feminism time, kind of the unwritten culture became, we do not need physicians in our classroom. Everything we know in our discipline can be taught by nurses. So it was nothing but nurses in our classroom. And unfortunately, we still see some of that in some of the faculty today. They think, well, if we start having behavioral scientists in the nursing faculty, then pretty soon, they're going to take over and we'll be second-class citizens again. So we still have some of that fallout, I think, that prevents us from moving ahead in team-based spirit. With today's emphasis on interprofessional education, you have to give team-based care. We've suddenly begun to ask ourselves, why are we educating physicians here and nurses here and other disciplines, and then when they graduate, they've got to work together. They'd never worked together at all before then. So we're now trying to change the educational model back to one of where we are learning together and practicing together and then working together when we graduate. Another thing that is so different now, when I was in school, the nursing students were freely welcome to come to any of the med school lectures and certainly any guest speakers and out-of-town professors and things like this. Whereas now it would be a major effort to try to get nursing students to come over and listen to a lecture where you have somebody, Nobel laureate here, and it's an opportunity for all of our students. So I think we're swinging back now toward trying to work more together in disciplines. Another thing that should be of interest to you is that when I was in school at Emory, and I was married by then to a medical student, and in his class there were 60 students and only 2 females. And those two females were very much an anomaly. and everybody's saying, I wonder how long they're going to last. And it was even like, you know, they're not going to last, so why don't they just go on and get out of here? It was really tough on those women to make it. And today we're, what, 50% women in medicine.
And I think that was where we were going to move next, sort of in diversity issues in nursing. And first of all, looking at men in nursing and contrasting that with medicine, as I mentioned earlier. It has not always been unusual for men to be in nursing in this country. Men were in nursing during the Civil War. That was not uncommon. The poet Walt Whitman, you might not know, was a nurse during the Civil War. There was a terrible yellow fever epidemic in 1878 throughout the South, and many of the nurses during that epidemic were men. Nursing schools started opening in the United States in the early 1870s, started in the Northeast, in New York and Boston, started opening, Connecticut up there, and slowly moved outward to other parts of the country. But when those nursing schools started opening, they were all for the education of young women. And so nursing in contemporary times has struggled to try to attract men back into nursing. And I know when Dean Starck was the dean of the at UT that you had
23%.
yes, and you had worked on initiatives to try to attract men back to nursing. Maybe you could talk about that.
I think the national average is still under 10% of nurses are male. Many of the male students are going into anesthesia, emergency trauma. Some of those fields I think are very attractive to males, but we occasionally have a male who wants to be a neonatal nurse. So it's we should not stereotype, of course, but we did target some of our recruitment to those things that we felt like would attract males. In fact, we asked a group of male nurses in the medical center to advise us on how we could improve our recruitment. And one of the things they said is you got to change all this flowery language in your brochures and everything. So nursing is caring and nurturing and this and that. We want to hear that, you know, you save lives and the trauma aspect and the fast-paced, high-tech, all those kind of things. So we did some changes in the way we recruited and how we recruited, and we were able to really boost our male enrollment.
But looking back at the history of the development both of medicine and nursing, you do have to stop and think what was going on socially that nursing became such a female role and medicine was such a male role, and how we have managed to create change in some area of that. And so it's really fascinating to look back at the role of feminism, what that played in nursing, but really this is not a huge time frame, and it's sometimes helpful to look back and think, okay, we think nothing ever changes, but it really does. It may be slower than we want it to be, but change does happen, and it's helpful to look back to see why that did occur. Another area that we sort of mentioned was attracting other minorities into nursing, and medicine probably reflects the same thing, and maybe you could address what was done in that.
At the time when I was in nursing school in late 1950s and 60s, there were separate schools, and I don't think we had any male students whatsoever at Grady in either of those.
Either.
In fact, I remember I was a young teacher, and we had our first male student in nursing, and all the hospitals were saying, what are we going to do? We can't assign any female patients. We can't. Well, when you take care of OB, you don't have much choice. You know, you got. So this male student was assigned like an 80-year-old woman to give a bed bath to and everything. So he came back, and it was just off. The hospital was like, "What he did? What?" And it was just really big deal. And he said, "Well, you know what? She'd had a double mastectomy. There was nothing to see anyway, for goodness sake." So it was those kind of things. You look back now and think that was so strange. You know, we don't think about that at all today. Diversity of racial diversity is something I think we're still working on. We have done a better job at the baccalaureate, the entry level, but we're having a hard time getting those students to go on for higher education so they can be faculty, because students need role model faculty. So the best strategy we have found is kind of to handpick students and say, you need to go right on to graduate school. Many of these students from disadvantaged backgrounds, regardless of racial background, are first-time college students. And they are very interested in getting an education and starting to work. And once you start to work and you get a car payment and you get a house payment and all these things, it becomes more difficult to go back to school. So we've tried to do a better job with getting scholarships and loans, and also saying to these students that we tap on the shoulder, while you're used to being poor, go on to graduate school and get it over with, get it done. But I think the Hispanic nurse population is just a little over 10%. And black population is probably much better. I don't know percentage-wise, and it varies certainly by state as well. But I would say 77 or so % of nursing workforce is still white, Caucasian.
And then another thing that we talked about was the big changes that we are seeing currently that affects medicine as well, concerning technological development, simulation, how that is used in nursing these days, and what a change that has been over the years for you, what you have seen.
Well, up until the last 10 years, I would say the only kind of practice mannequins we had in our labs were those still life dolls, life-size dolls. And yes, they had, you could do IV, they had rubber arms that you could practice IV, and they had other things that you could practice, catheterization and like that. But it's been in the last 10 years that we've gotten the high fidelity simulation mannequins, and the possibilities are wide open. Again, what we've developed on this campus and on most campuses, the med school has a lab, we have a lab, the dental school has their lab, and we don't do anything where we could do team-based practice. For instance, we need to practice a code that is students from the different disciplines, because this is what you're going to encounter in reality. So we are trying at this point to say, even though we have separate labs and transportation of students across all these buildings is very difficult, we need to have team-based simulation training in certain things.
And how would you say that technology has impacted nursing education?
Oh,
from our early days.
Yes, from our early days, I don't think we could have even dreamed of some of the things that we have now. And it just keeps growing exponentially, as you know. But, and that's one of the arguments I like to use when we think about nurse practitioners and the increasing scope of practice. There was a time when only physicians took blood pressure. And as we moved along, it's like the physician said, the nurses, you take the blood pressure and I'm going to do something else. So we're now at a stage where the nurse practitioner can do a lot of things that only physicians used to be able to do. Why not let everybody function to the maximum of their education and training. So we need to constantly change who handles what kind of technology. Some nurse practitioners at MD Anderson do some very high-tech procedures. And of course they are trained and credentialed and so forth to do those things. But we're constantly going to have to adjust to technology.
And what do you see the role, because we hear a lot about the role of the nurse practitioner, especially under the new healthcare situation?
We do not have enough, nor will we have enough with our present educational system to ever meet the needs of the high demands for an increase of access, that is, people who have insurance that now can have a primary care provider. So to me, the only way that we're ever going to hope to address this is to work in teams, physicians with nurse practitioners, and physician specialists with generalist nurse practitioners who can take care of the patient's other kind of needs. We've got to work in teams, and we've got to let everybody practice to the utmost of their capabilities.
And so you see the nurse practitioners as the entry point into the healthcare system?
Not necessarily, but a primary care provider, whether it's physician or nurse practitioner or PA.
And looking back over your 30 years as dean of the UT School of Nursing, when you reflect back on that, what do you see as the greatest changes that have happened in nursing education?
That's a loaded question and many, many answers, but I think the biggest change is the number of avenues that a nurse can take. In other words, we have grown so many different kinds of master specialties.
And could you talk about that a little bit, about the different programs that are available?
Right. Well, at our school and in many of the larger health science center schools, there's gerontology, which we've now combined with adult, because it's like if you take care of adults, you're going to be taking care of geriatrics. So those two are now combined. Pediatrics, neonatal, adult, and then there's women's health, and some have developed an adult men's health program. Then you have all kind of super specialists, cardiovascular, nurse specialists, neurology, oncology, forensics, and it just goes on and on. The doctor of nursing practice is another innovation. Yes, Tom?
Could you tell us something about how you came to be the dean? How did you get to be the dean of the School of Nursing? And how did that develop over the years? Because you were the one who built this school into one with a national reputation. But I'd like to hear the personal side of that.
Well, I think all of my career moves, a lot of them have been serendipity. And I'm not one of those people that sat down and said, let me make a 5-year goal or 10-year goal. And I think what I have done is be open to opportunities and seek out opportunities. So how I got into administration, period, from being a faculty member was we had a very tough situation in Georgia, which I can go into if you need detail. But I was asked to consider that position. And I remember at the time I was making $13,000 a year. Can you even imagine that now? And I kind of flippantly said, well, I might do it for $20,000 a year. And they said, you got it. I said, what? So that's basically how I got into my first administrative job. And I found that I liked it. I liked the problem solving. I liked having to deal with a lot of things at the same time. And then, again, I only had the master's degree at that point. So pretty soon I realized if I'm going to stay in this, I'm going to need a doctorate. So that's when I went back and got the doctoral degree. And at that point, when I got my doctorate at Alabama, my goal was to find a position under a very top-notch dean of nursing and try to learn in that situation. I kept looking for those kind of positions. And the associate dean of the program said, I think you ought to look at this program here, which is you would be the dean. I said, oh, no, I'm not ready to be dean. I want to go. But she said, well, look at it, and if you decide you like it, I'll help you with all these things. So I did go and look at that program as well as others. And I really liked it, and everything fit into place. My family situation, everything was like, oh, wow, this looks like it's meant to be. And so I took that position, and I would call that associate dean at the graduate program in Alabama from time to time, say, oh, I can't believe what happened. And she would walk me through some of those things. And then I remember I needed an assistant dean. And I called my mentor and I said, I think I would like to take the assistant dean position and let them recruit somebody else. This is just too much, driving me crazy. And she said, no, you can do it. You stick with it. You can do it. So anyway, I finally got to where, okay, this is doable. And I kept at it. And I stayed there 5 years, but it was an academic campus. And I missed the medical center environment. I missed, as I said, I didn't like having to read about something instead of being where it was happening. And that's when I started looking around and came upon this position here. And that's a funny story, too, and I know we need to wind up so they can have some questions.
No, we have time for questions.
Okay. So I had been at Alabama for 5 years and decided I wanted to go to an academic health center. So I was interviewing in California, and they had called me and said, would you stop by Houston and look at this on your way back? And I said, okay. So I'll go to California, and it's right after Proposition 13, which was where they voted, the state voted to basically cut funding for higher education. So I went to California, and they put me up in a dorm room, and they said, well, sorry, we can't take you out to dinner, but there's a place you can walk a couple of blocks up here to get your dinner. And so it went like that the whole time. And then I came back through Houston, and they put me up at the Shamrock Hotel over here that had a pool the size of a swimming pool, and I had a suite. I called my kids and said, guess what? I have a room that has 2 televisions. And it's really the royal carpet kind of thing. And I met with the president, who's Roger Bolger. And he had called me and said, if you don't mind, we'll meet at the hotel instead of over at the campus. And I said, okay. So he came over there with the chair of the search committee, and they said, well, if you don't mind, after breakfast, we'll go up to your suite and talk. And I thought, that's a little bit funny. Okay. So we went up there, and he said, now the faculty don't know that you're here. And I don't want to tell them that you're here because they had a search committee, and they gave me a name of somebody and I met, and we just didn't have chemistry. So this time, I'm going to find the person, and then I'm going to let the search committee go through their process. And so the president and I hit it off, and he actually made me the job offer that time before I'd ever met with the faculty. So at any rate, one of the things that he said to me was, there's not anything that you can't think to do that we can't find the resources to do. Now, after being in California and after being in Alabama where we couldn't afford coffee for the faculty meetings, that sounded pretty good. And, basically that has proven to be the case.
I was just going to ask Pat to tell what she's done to increase the number of doctoral faculty that are available in the Gulf Coast region.
Most nurses that get their doctorate work and go to school. So they work full-time, they are family responsibilities, all those things. So it takes them about 7 years to go through a 3-year program because they go in part-time. So we devised a program. We actually copied one in California where a foundation had given UCSF $9 million. So we decided to try to do something like that in Texas, but we had the hospitals and others come together and pool some money for about $3 million. And what we did was we selected master's graduates, and we said, we want you to go to school full-time and finish this program in 3 years. And then when you graduate, you got to pay us back 3 years of teaching. And then we hope they'd stay longer than that. We gave them $60,000 a year to go to school full-time. They could work 1 day a week because some of them were nurse practitioners and they needed the practical experience. But we started that program. We had 10 students. We graduated all 10 of them. They all 10 came on faculty. And so we immediately were able to expand enrollment in other programs we needed. The next year, Robert Wood Johnson decided to do a program like that, and now they have picked that up, and they do that. But they have they give out the money, and the school has to match some of it, and the students don't get quite $60,000, but they have now put that program in all over the country, and everybody's getting these 3-year accelerated programs.
I just wanted to know, how has the big rise in interest in being a nurse practitioner changed the nursing school, like applications to nursing school? Have you seen much of a change with that? Because I know a lot of people in college were trying to get a nurse practitioner school, and it was really tough for them, but I guess it's really competitive now. I wondered if that's taken away from applications to nursing.
Let me answer it 2 or 3 ways. One is it did take away from application to be a nurse educator, because it's not just the program itself, but the salaries they make when they graduate is so much different. Who would want to go into one when you can go into the other and make, almost twice as much? So we had to come up with some innovative ways to get faculty. So we do faculty, you can teach part-time and practice, so they would have the best of both worlds. We applied for a grant, and there were only 5 in the nation given, and we got one of them in Houston. They give the money to the hospitals, and it's sort of like graduate. How many of you are medical students? You all know what GME is, right? Okay, it funds your residencies. The feds created a graduate nursing education program to see how would this work if we did the same thing for nurse practitioners as we do for residents. And the way the program is set up is they give us money to pay for the clinical training of additional students to increase the students. So in our area, we said we were going to increase by 100 graduates a year. And we have 4 schools that are involved because one school couldn't do it with that many. So we said we were going to increase by 100 a year. Guess what? We increased at least 4 times that much. Because what the Fed's program was, if you take them, we'll pay for them. They didn't say, we'll give you this much money and you have to make it last. They said, you get more of them, we'll pay more.
And was that nurse practitioners or just
This
nurses?
is advanced practice nurses,
Okay.
which includes nurse practitioners, clinical nurse specialists, nurse midwives, and nurse anesthetists. So basically, yes, we've increased enrollment greatly, but we've been able to accommodate those. That federal project runs out in the end of 2016. So we're already lobbying to try to get that made permanent.
Maybe just to close, where do you say that nursing is heading?
Well, I think it's one of the best times ever in the world to be a nurse. I think that the challenges are there, and the wonderful thing about a nursing career is you can do so many different things. You don't have to work in a certain place and do a certain kind of routine. There are so many different options for nursing. But I think particularly with interprofessional, emphasis in practice. That the nurse is the coordinator of the team, pulls people together, keeps people organized and moving ahead. And I think that's going to be a great responsibility and role for the nurses ahead.
Well, thank you for coming out of your sick bed.
Yeah, sorry about that.